Okay, what is meaningful community engagement? Yeah, so the salon is held by, I'm sure you know, but NCRA, so Northern California Recycling Association, and the DEI committee. And we, for various reasons, decided this would be a good topic to have a conversation about in this sort of informal way. So, if you have any thoughts, feel free to please share. We really want this to be like a discussion today and not so much like a lecture. So definitely participate and share your experiences and thoughts for how you do things or how things can be improved, what you've noticed. So to sort of kick it off and start about this topic, the reason why we decided this would be a really good topic is because our DEI committee was discussing how, with a lot of capital improvement projects, especially with like local government or different projects we might implement, it seems like the easiest way to go about it is sort of like minimal effort, right? Whatever the Brown Act says or whatever a permitting process requires, we post meeting notices at the building or on our website. And so few of us really think about how can we make sure the people who are most impacted by our project or by our meeting or whatever is aware of what's going on. And for me, so my name is Zincy, by the way. I work for Zero Waste Sonoma. And in Sonoma County, just recently, this past summer, and we had like a outside entity, one of a company, I should say. I'm not related to that company or don't work for them or anything, but there was a company in Sonoma County that just this summer that had a disastrous public engagement um, situation. And basically, what happened was the neighborhood at this near this project first found out about the project only when there was like the mandatory outreach that like there was like a postcard or something that was mailed because it was mandatory for their permit. And people were really upset, right? Because they had never heard about this. It was just um, what not to do in a community engagement situation. That sort of got me thinking about, what can we do to make sure, say, if you were building a compost facility, that the neighbors knew about it, they got their questions answered before everything started snowballing and people have, misinformation and all of that. So, we've invited, some people to the salon here today who have worked in this space and have, spent a considerable amount of time thinking about these things. But obviously, um, you all might have ideas about community outreach as well. So, I'll just pause there for a second. And Rika, Felicia, they're also on the DEI committee. Do you guys have anything to add?
Yeah, I can jump in. Hi everyone. I'm Reka Abraham with Recycle More. We're the West Contra Costa Waste Management Authority. And we were just having this kind of discussion offhand, me, Zincy, and Felicia. And what came up for me, I think, as we're talking about this, and similar to Zincy's her example, it kind of was a little bit more closer to home for us, is that we've found that when we're trying to do community engagement around like rate increases and things like that, we have a really hard time getting to the whole community, and we only hear the same voices over and over. And kind of doing an internal look at like how our outreach frameworks look like and why we're missing key community components, and a little bit more of the stakeholders that we're having a harder time reaching. And I think this is very common in local government, that the general avenues of communication don't reach everybody, particularly people that you want to hear from. This and like the voices that are very important, but maybe a little bit quieter. And so our thought with this was just really informal, give kind of examples that we've gone through, and maybe suggestions that we can hear from other folks on the call today about what's worked for you, what hasn't worked for you, what does successful communication look like, how you identify your stakeholders, and things like that. So we're not necessarily asking a specific question, but we would love to hear from all of you, your experiences, and make this more of a peer share space than um, a lecture, like Cincy said. There's no presentations today. So we're really excited to see you all here today. And we can open up the floor for any questions, unless Felicia, would you like to give a quick intro as well?
Sure, yeah, I can introduce myself. So, hi, Felicia Castaneda. I'm also on the NICRA DEI committee. I work for HF&H Consultants, but I do have a background working for a private hauler as well as city local government. And I don't really have too much more to add from what you, Reka and Zinzi said, but just looking forward to hearing what folks have to say and hearing everyone's experiences. So, yeah, I think we can open it up.
Yeah, and maybe to start off the discussion, not to put you on the spot, but Anya, I know you and I spoke about this really cool project that you did last year. Would you be willing to share?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Anya, she, her pronouns. I'm the racial equity coordinator for SF Environment, which is our city and county of San Francisco department. Some of you all know us. We've been very active in NICRA for many, many years. I have also been part of NICRA for some time. And then recently with this new role, I've stepped back a little bit, but we do a lot of kind of like within our department consulting for the zero waste team to figure out what community engagement could look like. One thing when you were talking about Reka was I was reminded of the rate change that happened for San Francisco recently. And that's not the project Zinzi is talking about, but we did have to hire a firm that I think this was the first time we were not kind of involved, and it was all like outsourced just to the controller's office because they were like, we need to do it like all by ourselves. And we did hear from the organization that worked closely with us on many other projects about like how they went um, around doing that kind of community engagement. So there is, we always default to our community engagement spectrum that goes all the way from ignore all the way to defer to. And ignore is what we usually do in government, or sometimes we think we're doing great just by informing people, but we don't get to the involvement or the consulting, and many times we never get to the defer to because as government entities or anyone that's like working in a position of power, our systems are just not set up to share that power. So the example that came to mind last week when I was talking with Cincy was the Bayview charging plaza that we put together. So this was a capital project. We had a grant from the state that said that we need to put a EV charging plaza in a disadvantaged community. So we did a lot of secondary research on like, okay, which are the communities that have heightened levels of air pollution, which communities might actually benefit from an EV, where's the EV charging deficit? As you know, San Francisco is a tiny, tiny city. It's 7 by 7 miles. There isn't much space for anything. Parking is like so rare that like putting an EV charging facility anywhere is a little bit of a pain. And we were only talking about 6 chargers. So one would say you're putting in 6 chargers, like why do you need to go through this whole process? And I'll outline the whole process for y'all. So it started with community engagement. We, in the grant, we wrote up a $120,000 set aside for community engagement. It was very much spent on the nonprofit that did the engagement, the surveys, and also on the stipends and participation contribution that we provided to the nonprofits and the participants that came to the community engagement meetings and the listening sessions. But I just want to put that out there that not everybody's going to have that 120,000 set aside to do anything. Usually the budget is zero. So we learned a lot from this project of like, it was somebody was filling it out and they were like, shouldn't we put something for outreach? And they were like, how much? And at 4:45 p.m. for a 5 p.m. deadline, they were going around and asking anyone that was in the office what we would think would make a good number. And we were like, well, shoot for the stars. Let's say $100,000. And they were like, well, maybe $20,000 for stipends. And that's how the number was not it wasn't like super scientific, and it was also the first time we were setting aside money. Usually we'll just bear the cost and bear the expense because we want to do community engagement. So it was a larger grant because it was a capital grant, and it included giving money to EVgo, a company that was going to put the charges. So 120,000 was minuscule compared to like the other stuff that they were doing. So we could have just said, we're going to partner with EVgo. EVgo is going to put chargers where I think chargers should be. Where should the chargers be? Oh, I'm the racial equity coordinator. Let's put it all in the Bayview because, that's our environmental justice community of choice. It never gets any resources. Let's put it there. Somebody else might be like, there are so many cars in Pack Heights. Let's put it in Pack Heights. And then it just becomes like, who's going to be the louder voice in the room? So instead, what we did is let's ask community. So the first round of community engagement that we did was with people that were grass tops and people that like are from trusted CBOs and community-based organizations. And we asked them like, where do you think would be the most impact for these 6 charging spots? And I always like to say San Francisco is like a lab. It's so tiny, in a little petri dish. We try these different experiments and they work sometimes they don't work, but we learn a lot from it. And then we can provide that as a template for our other programs. So we tried with these 6 chargers, and what we heard overwhelmingly is that the Bayview neighborhood has very high air pollution. There are a lot of trucks that go by it. So if we start this project with just 6 chargers, it signals to everybody that, oh, this is a charging hub. Like we could charge our cars here. Tomorrow there'll be buses that could charge here. There could be heavy duty trucks that could charge here. So it was just that little bit of a leap of faith that we took, and we went into that community. We talked to 3 different sets of people through 3 different organizations. And all of this was done through a nonprofit called N2 Action. So N2 Action connected us with 3 different organizations, and we went and presented. Every time the presentation was different. We had everything planned, and then when we went into community, it all changed. And we had enough staff to kind of like roll with the punches. We had a giant map of the main area of Bayview printed out, and we had people come in and tell us like where they would like to have this facility. Now, a lot of our projects don't have that kind of flexibility, right? Like you have a facility that the city has decided this is where it's going to be. So how you do community engagement might depend on like what you're really asking them to do. We would not have chosen the spot that we ended up choosing if community had not backed it up. We went to churches, we talked to people that were like coming out of the shopping complex. Everybody was like, oh my God, don't take my parking away, but it would be great to have an EV charger. And having those 2 contradicting viewpoints from community helped us really be very grounded in our approach. So it was not easy. There were times when we would go in and we'd say, okay, let's like have this round table. And that was maybe the 7th time someone from government had come and asked them their opinion about something and never gotten back to them. So there was a lot of frustration. People started telling us everything that government had done wrong. And it would not have been really important at the time for us to differentiate ourselves from, say, the municipal transit authority, or like, oh, no, that's not us. Like, they don't care. You're government. You're coming out. You got to take all the choice comments that they can make. The best thing that we did was not be the face of the project. So we went through a trusted partner. So the trusted partner interaction was the one that was facilitating the meeting, and we were just participants, just like everybody else. So when they had questions, we would chime in and say, okay, noted, this is good to know, this is what's coming up. At one point, the person that does EV work for the city started getting a lot of questions about EVs. And that was not the point of these meetings. The community engagement listening sessions were about where should we put a charger, but it became about what is a charger, what kind of chargers there are, what kind of EV should I buy, what incentives do EVs have. And she just went up there and did like a TED talk for 20 minutes about all of these things, because we realize that when we are responding to community, we are supposed to focus on like what they want and not what we want. And somewhere along the way, we come to this common pool of understanding where what they want and what we want is the same thing. And that's where we find that sweet synergy happening. So if y'all are interested, I'll put this link in the chat about like how they did the community engagement and what were the outcomes of this project. How many of y'all feel like people need to recycle or compost or insert blank, action here that you are in charge of because it's good for the planet and because it's the right thing to do? And how many of y'all have failed with that messaging? Right? Yeah. Because the people that think that's the right thing to do are all exactly like us. They probably work for government or a nonprofit, or they don't have time to think about it. So we need to get them where they're at. And a tool that has really helped us get through to that piece is called an empathy interview. And it just talks about like, what is this community hearing about and how do we make what we are saying more relevant to them? So I can post that in the chat as well if you all want to download it and take a look at it when you have some time.
Thank you so much, Anya. Does anyone have questions? I know, Laurentine, you had your hand up earlier.
I was just going to share. So maybe you want to do Q&A first, and then I can come back and share. I mean, we worked with Felicia and HF&H. We're still updating our zero waste plan, but we did equity scans, and part of those equity scans included meeting with the unhoused and asking them for their input. And some of it has to do with time of day. So to get them to come, we offered a meal, and we had a meal for them. It was a boxed meal, and we also gave out cards, which gas cards, and I think they were all gas cards. Maybe it was a card for groceries, perhaps. So those were the incentives to get them in the seats, and then just hearing their ideas. Once we got them there, it was really great interaction and great ideas that we hadn't considered. Like from explaining, like, we talk about for the bulky item pickup, you can put 3 cubic yards at the sidewalk. And they're like, okay, how do you measure 3 cubic yards? Just simple things like that. So that was, and then one of the other focus groups was families, reaching out to families. So that was what we did with the help of HF&H. So I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, I love that. And I know, Anya, when you and I talked, you talked about incentives, not only free food, but also childcare, right?
Yeah, I was at the Green Lining Institute conference last year, and somebody was saying, yeah, food and cookies are like now just basic things. Like if you do a community engagement and you don't have the food, or like if it's like an afternoon time, like drinks and cookies, don't bother. And I think the baseline is also childcare. If you have a larger group and you want families more involved, also doing engagement. And this is not always going to be possible, right? Sometimes you have to do it at the site or near the site, but doing engagement at community organizations that can support that kind of a structure and have it at a place where they're already going. So for many of our communities, there are very specific nonprofits that serve their needs. And so if they're going to that community, we had like a Mother's Day luncheon thing that Family Connection Center was hosting. And we just came and started talking about food waste, tips for reducing food waste. It wasn't really like edible food recovery, it was just like residential food waste prevention. And they were already there. They were making bouquets for Mother's Day, and they had come with their children, and we played, a game of loteria, and like it was in language, and they loved it. They left there kind of learning something new. Now they might not have remembered like who we were, like what we did, what all the other things we do, but the message went across because we were already in a space they already trust. So at a time when trust is so low, you have to give them food and you have to give them like something extra, stipends. And our city has like, oh my God, I don't know why they would even go there, but like to get a gift card issued, you have to basically pledge your firstborn to the city. So we tried not going that route, but it is definitely something that you have to give stipends and you have to like make it worth their while. Otherwise, you do risk having them come out um, when it's at a board of supervisors meeting or some other public forum where you think, oh, I've done all the community engagement, and people are like really mad and frustrated. And, like I said, with the baby charging plaza, having those meetings behind us gave us so much confidence to go into the community and do that outreach. I mean, the mayor was there in the Bayview, and he's not a beloved person over there. So no heckling, nothing. It went smoothly because all the community leaders were also there with the mayor there. So people see that, people are like, oh, it must be something good for our community.
Yeah, love that. Felicia, you had your hand up. Otherwise, Recreate had their hand up as well.
Yeah, I was just gonna kind of, I think Anya, you kind of covered just the importance of like stipends or incentives and funding for these efforts. I think that's somewhere that folks fall short in often because it can be sort of hard to determine exactly how much funding you need, and like that analysis of kind of your return on investment is a little bit harder to justify on paper. And so I think that can be difficult, not to mention some of the administrative like burdens of, for example, handing out gift cards. So I think that can be a real challenge for folks, but it's super important, just like you all are mentioning. So I just wanted to kind of underscore that.
And I just want to call out really quickly, Mark Green from City of Alameda mentioned in the chat that the gift card for City of Alameda was also very challenging to obtain. So using the consultant HF&H to purchase the gift cards removed the obstacle. I don't know your name, but Recreate, do you want to ask a question?
Yes, I'm so sorry. I'm Rebecca with Recreate. My colleague Kendra is also on the call right now. We do a lot of education and outreach, SB 1383, plastic waste reduction, waste diversion, things like that. I just want to share something that we did recently that was very successful, just a little tiny thing, and then ask a question about a challenge we're having. One is in the city of Santa Clarita doing food recovery, edible food recovery. I'm just a big fan of going to where people already are. I love to hear you already saying that, trying not to get people to come out for something, but meeting them at an event or something like that. And we did a tourism board meeting and framed edible food recovery with, we just started, instead of talking about SB 1383 and the requirements and how to be compliant and all that, all we said was there's this percentage of people in Santa Clarita who don't know where their next meal is coming from. This percentage of your neighbors and friends and your barista are going to the Santa Clarita Food Pantry to get dinner tonight. That sort of thing. These many children, and using the actual numbers and facts of the city to first just umbrella everything under this is the problem. You have a problem, and this is what we can, and then following up with, and SB 1383 helps connect the dots between getting your usable food into the hands of people who need it most. And that was the most successful interaction we had. We had hotels, restaurants coming up to us afterwards saying, we don't fit the criteria as a tier 1 or a tier 2, but we want to give. So how can we give? We still have leftover food. And we had never had people want to go above and beyond as much as when we just were like, this is an issue of people not having enough to eat. We'll get into the regulations later and the compliance and the paperwork. That was a highly successful tactic that we've been using more and more. A challenge that we're having now in a project in San Diego where we're trying to help residents divert their green waste, their food scraps, organic waste, residents, is that when we are targeting the communities of concern and the communities in need, it seems as if this is just, they have far greater problems than what to do with their garbage. And this is not something that empathy interviews. Yeah, this is not something that we often deal with. We often just go to a lot of business owners and things like that, or just more middle class communities. And we are trying to really find the best tact for dealing with a community who might want to be engaged, but really has the bandwidth to get through the day. Any thoughts on that would be really helpful. Thank you.
I can jump in on that, I think, because my jurisdiction, and this is something I've been trying to figure out since I started as a program manager here, the vast majority of our jurisdiction is food insecure, which is so, and that's kind of how we figured out where our jurisdiction levels lie, looking at SNAP, looking at like the PG&E discount incentive based on income of where people are at today within the box of my jurisdiction and what their concerns are in a day-to-day. So it's very obvious from looking at the numbers that the majority of these people are not going to care that there is an SB 1383 requirement that says you need to divert because the state says so. It's like, no, these folks are focusing on feeding their families and bringing enough income so that their kids can go to school with a lunch and things like that. So I think from my perspective, coming in as local government, where unfortunately there's so many different directions that the funding needs to go in community outreach and things like that. Really reframing, like you were saying, I love hearing this about not just coming in with the requirements that we're trying to meet, but trying to see the perspective of the folks that we're working with. And I think what has been really helpful for us from a food recovery point of view, which also tied into just a waste diversion point of view, is working with the food recovery organizations that are out with the folks every day, and seeing from their perspective which parts of the community are really struggling, what the struggles are. Also just even identifying like the different demographics that we have that we didn't quite realize. We do everything in English and Spanish, but there's a lot of other folks here too who don't speak English that we're not necessarily hitting with our outreach. And I will say I haven't been super successful because it's really difficult to get the money funding from my board of supervisors or from, the different member agencies for them to allocate funds towards that, because they also have their own big issues that they're working on trying to fix. So, it's like transportation's a big deal around here as well, and just clean air. And there's a lot of other things in addition to just waste recovery or food waste even, or food edible food recovery. And I think what has been really impactful, and I'll just reiterate that, is trying to find the local folks who are already in that space and tapping into the work they're doing rather than trying to reinvent the wheel. And as my outreach journey and kind of working on compliance from a more community-minded focus, that has been a really big thing for me, is finding those partnerships and finding the consultants who know those partnerships and helping us tap into that space. So I would say for local government folks is as you're doing your RFPs for your consultants, is that should be a factor that you're considering as well in the work that they've done in that space. I know Zinzi, we were just having a conversation about this as well on generally when you're looking at an RFP and the responses to that, it's like you're looking at their bid price and like how they're going to get you to whatever compliance goals, but incorporating that community outreach element and that diversity and equity element into how they focus their outreach and frameworks there, and tapping into the knowledge that they have from working in other jurisdictions and other communities is a really important piece as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I want to talk a little bit about that because, yeah, Rika and I had this discussion about this technical assistance project I was managing for the last couple of years. And this was technical assistance for complying with SB 1383, food recovery, but also, like the collection side, as well as disposable foodware ordinances that we have here in Sonoma County. And I felt like it was really important that we included an equity component to the RFP. I'll link that in the chat here in a little bit if people want to, kind of piggyback off that language. But yeah, it went really well. I was really happy with the project when it wrapped up earlier this year. So the way that equity focused into it was we had the consultant Cascadia do or create priority lists for the generators that they wanted to provide outreach to or provide technical assistance to. And at least 10% of the priority list was going to be generators in a disadvantaged community. And the way they did that was overlaying it with, oh, I forget now what it's called. There's like a federal map.
The Cal screen.
Yes, thank you very much. Cal screen. And so we were able to have 10% or more of the generators on our priority lists be in those areas and, receive technical assistance. And one thing that sort of put Cascadia over the other competitors when we were doing our RFP was they partnered with outreach specialists that were local in the community. So they lived here, they've worked here, and they knew, like, they already had connections in Sonoma County. And so we were really impressed with their proposal because of that. And I think it went over really well because, yeah, a lot of these connections had already been forged, and people are more likely to respond when it's someone they sort of know from their community. Like one of our outreach specialists, Ugo, he has a Spanish talk radio show. And so like people kind of already knew him and he could, yeah, more directly connect with the generators that they were talking to. And one example I'll give that was like really successful, like why, diversity, equity, inclusion is really important in these projects, and how it can make it more successful is um, we had a local market chain. It's called Lola's Market. It's a Hispanic grocery store. And before this technical assistance project, I had gone out there with my coworker to try to explain to them, what SB 1383 is, why they should start food recovery, and like give them a list of nonprofits to, send the food there. But it wasn't very successful. Like they weren't very receptive to it. But then when this technical assistance project came in with Cascadia and like the outreach team that were local, Ugo and his team, they were all bilingual, speaking Spanish and English, and they were able to sign up all 4 locations of Lola's Markets in Sonoma County to start donating food. And part of the success there was because they understood the cultural like implications of the food, right? They like just have familiarity with the food, and like Lola's Market had questions about like, can we donate the food that we provide at our hot bar, right? Like the chicharrones and all those like deli foods, so to speak. And so we were able to like talk them through it through our consultants. And one of the funny examples was not for me, but I think one of our other consultants who I guess just wasn't familiar with like Latino food or Latinx food, didn't understand that um plantains have to be like really black. Like when they're ripe, right? They turn really black, and that's when they're best, right? Like for sweet plantains. And he didn't understand that that can be donated, like that's good stuff. And was telling Lola's to compost it. Um, which is like really funny, right? But now we had this new outreach coordinator, outreach technical assistance outreach people, and they obviously understood what plantains were. They knew what to look for, and they were able to sort of connect the dots there and get those plantains donated. So just like small things like that really make a difference. And like I said, just having consultants. Understand the community that they're trying to reach out to builds trust, and you usually have better success. Yeah.
That's a really good story. The one thing I will say is that yes, people are not going to care about what we care about. But the fact that we're working in zero waste and not transportation and not a bank, I think we should just let that go. No one's going to care about what we are caring about, just quite the same way that we care about it. And that's where the empathy interview comes in a lot. And you might start with, I want this person to um, donate their food, or I want this person to not waste food. And by the end of the empathy interview, you're going to be singing a very different tune because you have realized, like, what are they hearing? Like, how do they interact with their food, with the government, with their neighbors? And at the end of it, you're like, oh, they want to save money or be better for their children or be healthier. And that's what you use to connect your call to action with their calling, or like whatever is their motivator. So the empathy interviews have always like gone a long way for us to connect of whatever we are trying to do with like what our audience is going to want. And the hard part is that every audience is going to be different. And so if we have a Cal Enviro Screen plus version in San Francisco called the Environmental Justice Maps, and it overlays the environmental burdens, asthma burdens, heat islands, uh, air pollution, like everything in one map. And so it has like a more comprehensive list of burdens that the population is facing. And every single population there, every single micro neighborhood is going to have like a very different take on everything. So we try and pilot in small doses so that we know that we have blanketed this neighborhood really well with this messaging. And we are never going to have the money to message every little neighborhood, but people talk and they kind of pass on knowledge that they feel connects with their values. And so like we were thinking of like our bring your own cup campaign, and we were like, oh, we should just be like, you don't bring your cup, like what are you, like, in the 90s, like, you're still wasting. And while that sounds good to like an English speaking audience, it sometimes comes off as very condescending when we say it in language. So we were like, maybe it can be, one cup, one cup at a time kind of a messaging in Spanish, or like take it one cup at a time and translate it in Spanish. Or like for the Chinese population, we were thinking of doing it more like, hey, gift your elders a reusable mug this holiday season. Like we need to understand our audience, and sometimes we're not going to be able to understand that audience. So in those cases, consultants like Cascadia come in and they're able to connect us with those people. And for every time we do something, the whole network benefits from it, right? Because at the end of the day, like California is diverse, but like there's like pockets of these communities throughout. And so we should be able to like kind of like use each other's research on this and like build on it.
I have some thoughts to add there, but before I do, I just want to pause and anyone want to jump in, or if you haven't had a chance to speak yet.
I wanted to jump back in and just say asking people, because part of our focus groups when we asked questions and then we found out, like there were plenty of people in the unhoused community that were doing great things. And they were things that they had learned, that their family did, or like they had learned from their grandparents or something. So they weren't completely removed from the sustainability. They were operating in the sustainability lens. It's just that they weren't connected. Like they're overlooked. So they don't know about certain programs that cities provide just because that information wasn't trickled down. And I'm sure, as everybody knows on the call, with MFDs, the way it works is, the address you have might not have all the tenant, A through Z or A through D or number one through whatever. So whoever gets those mailers, they don't usually provide it to their tenants. It goes to whoever's paying the bill. And sometimes that's not always the tenants, or maybe it's a bundled thing. And for whatever reason, you just have to make sure that you're thinking through your outreach process so that the people who need the information actually get it. And when you get them in the room and just ask them questions, you get the information you need. And they're very grateful. I mean, the people who came to those meetings were very grateful that they had an opportunity to share.
Yeah, thank you, Laurentine. I just wanted to add, we were talking about like language accessibility, and I had a question that maybe some of you have thoughts on. But here in Sonoma County, for Zero Waste Sonoma, we translate everything to English or to Spanish. So everything's provided in English and Spanish. And the reason being that the studies we've done in Sonoma County indicate that Spanish is spoken by at least 5% or more of the population. But obviously, there are so many other languages that aren't um, getting addressed, right? Like our materials just aren't getting translated to those. So, and that even if the population is minimal, I mean, they still deserve outreach. And so I guess I'm wondering how you guys determine, right? Like, is it just that if you have the money, you can try to translate to some of those other languages, or do you just sort of like use that 5% or some other um, standard to determine whether or not to translate to other languages?
I know for us in West Contra Costa, we're definitely using the percentages, and we have 5 member agencies, and one of them specifically is not the same in their demographics as the others. So we do tend to look at the census when they come out every year on what the languages spoken are, and then if we're doing specific outreach in certain areas, we will do Spanish and then whatever additional language as well. But you're right, it's really hard to find budget for that. So our thresholds are much higher than 5% for sure.
I don't know what the city does here, but I'm on our website. And so our website, there's the toggle to the language, and it has 6 languages. So Spanish, Chinese simplified, Tagalog, Vietnamese, Korean, and Arabic. Um, so someone can use that tool to translate the page into one of those languages. But I'm not sure where this list came from. I don't know if you know, Mark. Yeah, Mark says it's also from the census data for us that list came from.
Okay.
But we're trying, and when I worked in a different city, yeah, when you do boots on the ground, you get an idea of the business owners and the languages necessary. So I remember, like I think it's Sanskrit. I mean, there's a number of languages of of people who have active businesses maybe in your city. So when you're out doing, because part of what I do is work with businesses for our foodware ordinance. So then you get a different perspective too when you're on boots on the ground to see what languages are necessary that way as well. So it's not always, I don't think the census data is always as accurate as it could be.
Thanks, Laurentine. Susan, go ahead.
Yeah, so I work as a consultant for the City and County of San Francisco, and we did outreach to generators about SB 1383 and discovered that there are some businesses where actually it's Chinese language. And the advantage of being a contractor is that then we could use some of our budget to hire someone to do some help with outreach and who was based locally and very actually community minded and kind of went over and above with the help because she understood the goal of the project and really wanted to help. So that was a helpful process, although that's still an ongoing challenge. But that was really helpful. And then the other thing I just wanted to add, sorry, I was sort of in and out of the meeting, is doing outreach to on the generator side, the trade associations is a good one as a way to inform and sort of like, in fact, one generator we spoke with said, "Oh, yes, I'm happy to help. I think this is a good thing, and I'm happy to help introduce you." So that can be a way to go also in terms of doing outreach, is to leverage one person who thinks, who says, yes, this is a good thing. I hate regulation. I hate having yet another thing to take my time away from doing my money making business, but I understand the reason for it, and I will help introduce you and open some doors for you. So using that stores. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. Yeah, trade associations, I've never thought of that, but that is super helpful. Kind of going back to the language side of things, I just remembered an example that was really kind of funny and sort of relevant to the discussion today. So I know in the last year or two, the County of San Mateo had a pretty big project on trying to reduce like contamination in compost and organics, and they did a bunch of focus studies or focus groups to figure out what messaging would be the most impactful. And one result that I thought was really interesting was initially they were thinking of using the phrase clean compost, and they found out from their focus groups that that doesn't make sense when it's translated into Chinese. Because when you say clean, people think of like dirt, like soil, right? So calling it clean compost, like in Chinese, is a bit of an oxymoron. People were really confused about that. So they ended up changing that messaging to be healthy compost, and that seemed to resonate with a lot of different cultures.
I know people have
Zinzi,
to go, but we have like
oh,
a language access ordinance that San Francisco has that requires us to do certain languages. But we did a project last year called the Transcreation Project, and we took our commonly used phrases and we had community listening sessions for like, what would you say if I said greenwashing, or how would you explain it? And so we came up with a glossary that can be used to kind of like take care of the nuance of all of these technical terms. And I can put that in the chat as well.
thank you for all the resource sharing, Anya. You've sent us some stuff that I haven't seen before that is going to be really, I think, impactful for the work that I do. So I appreciate hearing, and it's great, hearing what has worked and what hasn't worked, and it kind of just helps people frame how to move forward with potential ideas there. But It's interesting also, I think we're also diverse. A lot of us are local government, but also our jurisdictions are also different at the resources that we have available to us, and how to, I think, move forward with that. My one other suggestion I wanted to make for the group that was really impactful for me is taking a course on not just community engagement, but on reframing focus when thinking about DEI in general. So there is a local consultant in the Bay Area who does a JEDI course, which they include justice in the DEI component, which really is just changing the framework. And when you're thinking about a situation, and this is pretty much exactly what you were saying too, Anya, it's not about what you want and the results that you want to see. It's really about where is your community and meeting them where they're at. And I think it does take a lot of reframing, and it's difficult to do when we're very much often deliverables focused. But it's I think an important learning curve to start working on. And I think the peer sharing and being able to connect with everybody is really helpful. And I'm loving that everyone wanted to come out today and chat with us about all of this. Is great resource sharing between all of us, folks. And I'm hopeful that Zinzi and I and Felicia will kind of continue these webinars moving forward and might have more conversations. Kendra.
Hi, I'm Kendra with Recreate. I, I I don't know if this is a pivot, but since we have a little bit of time, in the interest of peer sharing, I have kind of a question that in one of our communities we have been struggling to figure out how to do community outreach on. It's regarding Best By dates, in that a lot of the fro's in this community won't take anything past their best by date or even nearing best by date because the community will not accept it. So we're trying to figure out ways to not only do outreach to the food insecure population, but to the population at large, to kind of destigmatize this idea that food from a food recovery organization is less than. We want everybody to know that they're getting quality food regardless, but this idea that foods that are at their best by are not edible or they're rotten. We're having a hard time sort of dispelling that. So if anybody's had any luck doing community outreach on that subject, I would love to hear it.
Um, I think that's something we are kind of all struggling with food recovery. One of the things our consultant is doing is as they're working with our FROs, is to kind of come up with a few like kind of one pagers on like food myths. Like, so the labels is one of them, or like how to check if something is good to eat without looking at the label, and more like visual or like odor type um,
Yeah.
ways of checking, if your meat's good or if the dairy's still good. And often a lot of these things, dairy especially, will be good past the best by date. Canned foods are another one. I know in our jurisdiction we kind of struggle with the canned foods to begin with because they're not culturally appropriate often, and that's often what the food bank is giving out. So kind of playing with that space as well and with what's available. So I would say, not that we've had a huge amount of luck with that, but again, it's that community engagement factor in that the people who are working in the FROs are the ones who are most involved with the community and chatting with the community as they're coming through, and the folks who are food insecure. And when they're confident with their knowledge of food safety and things like that, it's easier for them to translate that to the folks who are receiving the food too. So I don't think that's necessarily a solution for you, but that's just the direction that we're kind of moving forward with in our jurisdiction.
Well, it's always good to know that other people are struggling with it as well. Not that that solves the problem, but at least it's not significant to this specific community.
I saw, Susan, you put a resource there in the chat called Eat or Toss. Is that something
Yeah.
that has worked for you?
Well, it's just personally. I learned about it from a colleague, and actually she learned about it from her mom. And it's a woman who does this site, and she's actually gotten some traction off of it. She had an article come out in the Washington Post. She's based in the DC area. Here's the you can subscribe, and it seems like a good resource because she like shows you these things, and like for Halloween it's like scary stuff. Is this scary or is it safe? And it's very clever. So it's more, very consumer oriented, but that's a way to start.
Well, hold on. I would be confused if I heard someone say eat and toss, then I
Eat
would
or
think,
toss or
but then toss where? I mean, if you say toss, it's going to go in the trash. So you have to make sure you message correctly because that's going to, people hear toss, they're like, oh, I'm going to chuck it in the trash.
So she might be, since she's just this, it's this one woman, mostly I think one woman operation, she might be amenable to like, hey, if we want to leverage this, if we give it a little funding, can we tweak it for the California market? And DC is starting to have uh, compost. They have piloting out some of it, and for multifamily they have some like centralized bins the way New York City does, where I think you have to scan and then put it in your compost bin or take it to the farmer's market. But like every community is doing it differently. But yeah.
Yeah, those kinds of taglines are really concerning because, the first one I heard that made me cringe was what is it like, throw it out if you don't know, toss it out or something along those lines. I was like, okay, hold on. That's
When in
like the
doubt, I think it's like when in doubt, throw it out.
Yeah, I was like, hold on. No, it's like when in doubt, find out because that's like the wrong message. So you have to be really careful with those because yeah, then the average person is just gonna, oh, okay, it's trash.
One thing we also do, like when we table, because our one department also like handles edible food waste recovery, residential food waste prevention, compost giveaways, all of it, right? So in our table, or like sometimes we take 3 tables, it starts with how do you preserve your food that you got from the market, and then some resources on the best farmers markets, and then you move on, and then you have like how do you, free stuff or make leftover stuff or like make pasta pesto out of like greens and stuff. Then you move over to like, okay, if it's really not good, then how do you compost it? Then we move over to what is really compost. And there's some activities for kids. And then we're like, oh, here's your compost bucket. Now that you know the whole life cycle, you can use this. And then go get some compost from this, neighboring site. So it's like a whole life cycle of food. It just makes the connection in people's minds.
So my fantasy is that all of you who have like a film commission in your cities will get to those people and say, offer them like this kind of stuff and say, we do it behind the camera, but also in front of the camera as a way to sort of, get leverage some social media outreach. There's a group down, I forget the name of it, down in LA, but that does some of that stuff. But I think it we tried a while ago. There's set designers who wait, every cooking show should have a compost bin on the kitchen, and so if you can talk to your film commissions and say, this is something you guys, let's, we can't be siloed with our messaging. We have to be all integrated.
I think that's a perfect perfect message to kind of stop this or move towards stopping this webinar. We have 1 minute left here, but we can't be siloed in our conversations. I definitely agree. I think working together with everybody, continuing this peer share, reaching out, and I think we're all doing our best. So that's the first step, and just continuing the conversation is very important. We are so thankful that all of you are able to join, and like I said, hopefully we'll be having more of these. So keep an eye out on NICRA's website if there's more coming up. And I believe that this will be posted. Bonnie, correct me if I'm wrong with the recording. Yes. All right. Thank you, everybody, so much. Thank you, Zinzi, for facilitating, and Felicia for helping us put this together, and all of you for attending. And we hope you have a great day.
Thank you.